Hello, my name is Greensville and welcome to the Rank 5 Guide for Japan. This is the part where ATGMs start to get used commonly, and the main threats your vehicles will face will be Heat FS and APFS DS rounds, as conventional rounds start to phase out with tanks starting to have composite and or reactive armor installed. The first tank in this guide is the Type 60 ATM. This large boxy tank is the first ATGM carrier for Japan. It holds 6 crew members, 4 in the front and 2 in the back, and there is very little empty space inside the vehicle. The weapon system of the Type 60 ATM is a twin ATGM launcher that fires 120mm ATGMs with a max penetration of 500mm at any range, with an explosive mass of 4.55 kilograms, along with the 50 cal that has a max penetration of 31mm. The ATGM has a max flight distance of 1.8 kilometers and has a not very good max speed of 85 meters a second, and it has a slow reload of 31 seconds. The ATGM is controlled with the WASD keys, and the vehicle cannot move while firing, along with the rockets needing to travel about 200 meters before you can operate the rocket. The Type 60 ATM has decent max speed of 45 kilometers per hour and an okay reverse speed of 9 kilometers per hour, and can get up to mid-30s at a decent rate. The armor on this tank is quite thin. The lower front plate is 18mm of RHA, with the lower portion being 12mm of RHA. The upper front plate, the front cheeks, and the lower side hull are 16mm of RHA, with the front having 15mm RHA tracks mounted on the front. The upper side hull, rear, and back crew hatch having 14mm of RHA. The gunner cupola has 20mm of cast armor for the viewports and 12mm of cast armor for the dome. The top of the tank has 8mm of RHA, and the rocket housing is 3mm of structural steel. The method of playing this tank is to take a mid-range to long-range hill fighting roll so that almost none of your tank is sticking out. With the rocket's high launch angle allows for shooting over steep hills, and the rocket's slow speed gives you time to adjust the rocket, since the WASD aim is not as good as mouse aiming. At the rocket's penetration, you will have little to no trouble penetrating tanks at battle rating 5.7 to 8.7. The downside of this tank is not only that the armor is very thin, so machine gun fire and enemy air can take you out, but overpressure mechanics will apply. But mainly is that you cannot hit enemy tanks in close range at 200 meters or less unless the front of your tank is angled downwards. But also, any high explosive rounds that hit the ATGMs while in the rocket housing could set them off, knocking you out. The M47 is an exact copy of the one in the US tech tree, and it is what the Japanese used to base their first NBT design on of the Type 61. This tall tank has 5 crew members that are decently spread out. The crew have access to driver only NVDs, and it has access to hunter-killer, where the commander can override operation of the gun from the gunner. The M47 uses a long barrel 90mm gun that has access to an OK APBC round with a max penetration of 193mm, an OK APC-BC with a max penetration of 185mm, 2 OK APCRs with a max penetration of 287mm and 321mm, a good Heat FS with a max penetration of 320mm at any range, and an alright HE round with a max penetration of 13mm at any range with an explosive mass of 925 grams. It has a painful 9.7 second reload time, so taking time to aim is key, and it has about a 13-second reload time to reload one round into the ready rack. The M47 has a decent max speed of 48 km per hour and an okay max reverse speed of 19 km per hour, and can get up to 30 km per hour at a decent rate. Like all American tanks, it has weird valued armor. The lower front plate is 76.2mm of cast armor for the lower half and 90mm of cast armor for the upper. The upper front plate is 101.6mm of cast armor with 75mm of cast armor around the machine gun port. The side hull armor covering the crew compartment is 76.2mm of RHA, while the back side protecting the engine is 50.8mm of RHA. The rear armor is 38 and 50.8mm of RHA. The top of the hull in the back is 22.2mm of RHA, and the top of the hull in the front is 22.2mm of cast armor with 25.4mm of cast armor for the crew hatches. The The turret mantlet is 74mm to 55mm of cast armor. The upper and lower armor around the mantlet is 101.6mm of cast armor, 63.5mm of cast armor for the side of the turret, 76.2mm of cast armor for the underside of the turret and part of the back of the turret, with 90mm of cast armor for the rest of the back of the turret, 76.2mm of cast armor for the commander's cupola, and 25.4mm of cast armor for the top of the turret. The method of playing this tank is either take a frontline approach, angling your tank slightly when peeking corners to improve armor and deflection, but also give you a better chance at hitting the enemies in a weak spot, or a mid-range roll to hit enemy tanks in the side, as your rounds will have little trouble penetrating the side armor of tanks at battle rating 6.3 to 8.3, but also your heat FS won't have much of any trouble penetrating the tanks you'll be facing. The downside of this tank is that all of your first stage ammo is attached to the turret ammo racks, so a shot to the side of the hull while looking forward could hit the ammo and set it off, knocking you out. But most of the rounds that you encounter at battle rating 7.0 to 8.3 will be heat FS, so your armor value means almost nothing, as heat will be able to penetrate you easily. The Hori production is Japan's production model attempt of a heavy tank destroyer. This long and tall tank has 6 crew members, 2 in the front and 4 in the back with the gun. The weapon system is a long-barreled 105mm gun that has access to a pretty good APHE with a max penetration of 233mm, and a good HE with a max penetration of 30mm at any range with an explosive mass of 2.52 kilograms. It has a painfully slow reload rate of 11.1 seconds, so taking time to aim is key. The Hori's horizontal guidance is not that great, with a plus or minus 10 degrees, but it has a pretty good vertical guidance of negative 10 to 20 degrees. It has an OK max speed of 40 kilometers per hour and an OK max reverse speed of 9 kilometers per hour, and it can get up to mid-30s at a decent rate. The armor on this tank is quite chunky in the front. 50mm of RHA for the lower front plate, 120mm of RHA for the front armor at an angle of 8 degrees, 120mm of RHA for the upper front plate and driver viewport at 70 degrees, 100mm of RHA for the front cheek armor at 16 degrees, 75mm of RHA for the lower side hull, upper side hull, side of crew compartment and crew compartment doors, 35mm of RHA for the back of the tank, 200mm of RHA for the front crew compartment, 200mm of cast armor for the gun housing, 225mm of cast armor for the turret mantlet, 225mm of RHA for the turret cheeks, 20mm of RHA for the top of the engine cover and crew compartment, 35mm of RHA for the top plate hinge for the gun, and 2 8mm RHA plates for the internal firewall between the 2 crew compartments and the engine. The method of playing this tank is to play a mid-range role, preferring to have the enemy shoot up at you to help improve round deflection, but also your APHE round will have little trouble penetrating enemy tanks in the side at mid-range, along with the front of most tanks at battle rating 6.3 to 7.0, and some tanks from battle rating 7.3 to 8.3. The downside of this tank is that it's quite large, so it's easy to spot. The heavy cannons on enemy aircraft at this battle rating can pin through your top armor, and when aiming down, the 35mm RHA plate lifts up, exposing the crew to enemy air. And if hit with a high explosive mass HE or heat round, it can overpressure the back crew compartment, and if going in with max ammo, a shot to the left or right side in the front could hit the ammo, setting it off. Hydropneumatic suspension is a type of suspension that uses hydraulics and gas. It is one of the key features of the Japanese main battle tanks, and it allows the tanks to rise and lower the front and back of the tank, much like the Swedish Sturv 101 to 103 series tanks. But for Japan, it allows them to raise and lower the whole tank, along with leaning the tank left and right. This feature can be key bound by going to the menu controls, and while under the suspension control tab, where you'll be able to keybind all the movements. The STB-1 is a prototype tank developed to modernize Japan's main battle tanks and is the first of 6 prototypes. Using a mix of US and German tank design, this vehicle has a low profile housing 4 crew members that are fairly spaced out. It comes equipped with driver NVDs and smoke grenades. It also has access to the Hunter Killer feature, allowing the tank commander to take control of the gun from the gunner, and it has a 2-plane stabilizer and a laser rangefinder. The weapon system on the STB-1 uses the same 150 105mm gun seen on the German Leopard 1. It has access to a pretty good APDS round with a max penetration of 303mm, and a good Heish round with a max penetration of 127mm at any range with an explosive mass of 3.89 kilograms. It has a good max speed of 53 kilometers per hour and an okay reverse speed of 7 kilometers per hour, and can get up to mid-30s at a decent rate. This is the start of Japanese tanks using Hydropneumatic suspension, giving the tank the ability to pivot the vehicle in all directions along with raising and lowering the tank. The armor on the STB-1 prioritizes the front and turret. The upper and lower front plates are 80mm of RHA at 57 and 65 degrees. The front plate where the two plates meet is 100mm of RHA. The upper half of the upper front plate is 40mm of RHA at 74 degrees with 20mm of RHA treads placed on it. The driver viewport is 50mm of RHA. The lower sides of the hull is 40mm of RHA. The upper side of the hull is 35mm of RHA for the storage panels and 40mm of RHA for the rest at 45 degrees. The rear of the tank is 25mm of RHA. The top of the hull is 20mm of RHA, and a 35mm RHA band is placed in front of the turret ring. The gun mantlet is variable thickness cast armor. The turret cheeks and half of the front side of the turret is 132mm of cast armor. The back half of the turret side is 75mm of cast armor, while the back of the turret and underside of the turret is 40mm of cast armor. The turret roof is also split, with the front half being 65mm of cast armor and the back being 20mm of cast armor. The commander's cupola is 30mm of cast armor, and there is a 5mm RHA firewall between the engine and crew compartment. The method of playing this tank is to take a medium-range hill fighting role while using your suspension to help lower your tank so only the gun barrel sticks out. Your APDS rounds will have no trouble penetrating tanks in the side. The downside of this tank is that the tank is full of ammo. If you go with more than 21 rounds, ammo would be stored in the front ammo rack, and if you go with more than 17 rounds, ammo will be stored in the middle of the turret ammo rack. Part of the 16 first stage ammo is attached to the turret ammo rack, so a shot to the side to the tank could hit the ammo, setting it off, but any shot to the turret front could over-penetrate and hit the first stage ammo stored in the back of the turret, setting it off and knocking you out. The Type 74C is the production model of the STB and is the first in the series of Type 74 main battle tank models you will play. Being slightly longer than the STB, it still holds 4 crew members that are decently spaced out, and it has smoke grenades, and now everyone in the tank has access to NVDs, along with the box in the front being an IR flashlight. Like the STB-1, this tank has a 2-plane stabilizer and laser rangefinder, along with having the hunter-killer feature for the commander. It also uses the same 105mm gun and has access to the same APDS and Heish round, but loses the smoke round in exchange for a Heat FS with a max penetration of 400mm at any range with an explosive mass of 1.27 kilograms. Like the STB-1, it has a good max speed of 53 kilometers per hour and a reverse speed of 7 kilometers per hour, and can get up to mid-30s at a decent rate. The Type 74 also uses the Hydropneumatic suspension, but can get slightly lower and higher than the STB-1. The armor on this tank is almost the same as the STB-1. The 80mm upper front plate is now 64 degrees. The upper 40mm plate is now 73 degrees. A 50mm RHA plate is added to the front of the driver viewport. The front side cheeks are now flat and changed to 50mm of RHA with a 5mm structural steel placed in front. The lower side hull is now 30mm of RHA, and the upper side hull is now 50mm of RHA in the front and 35mm of RHA for the rest at 44 degrees. The rear is now 25mm and 20mm of RHA, with 5mm structural steel added to the back. The top of the hull is now 25mm of RHA, and the 35mm RHA band in the front of the turret ring is now 6mm of RHA. The turret mantlet is now thicker, variable thickness cast armor. The back half of the turret side is now 67mm of cast armor. The rear of the turret is now 37mm of cast armor. The turret roof is now improved to help deflect rounds off the top, while the back of the roof is now 37mm of cast armor, and the commander's cupola is now 80mm of cast armor. The method of playing this tank is the same as the STB-1 in a medium range hill fighting role to help improve round deflection and lower your target silhouette. The APDS rounds will have little trouble penetrating tanks in the side, and now with the Heat FS you can penetrate most tanks you will face in the front. The downside of this is the same as the STB-1, with the position of all the ammo along with the chance of getting ammo racked from shots in the front. But since reactive armor and spaced armor will be more at play at battle rating 8.0 to 9.0, when shooting the enemy tanks with Heat FS, rounds will be absorbed by most of the reactive armor, so 2 shots will be needed to penetrate some tanks in the front. The last tank in the guide is the Type 87 RCV. This tiny but tall reconnaissance vehicle is fast but packs a punch. It has a very compact crew compartment of 5 people. It has access to smoke grenades, and driver and gunners has NVDs, along with also having the hunter-killer feature installed. The weapons system is a 25mm autocannon that has access to APDS rounds with a max penetration of 80mm, an HEIT round with a max penetration of 3mm at any range with an explosive mass of 54.4 grams, and an APFSD round with a max penetration of 92mm. It has a 100-round magazine that takes a bit over 10 seconds to reload, so ammo management is key. The Type 87 RCV is quite fast with a good max speed of 100 km per hour and an okay max reverse speed of 11 km per hour, and can get up to mid 40 km per hour at a decent rate. The armor is quite thin, with the lower front plate, driver and passenger view ports, along with the turret mantlet and turret cheeks being 20mm of RHA, and the whole entire rest of the vehicle being 10mm of RHA with 4mm structural steel plates and objects placed on the outside of the vehicle. The method of playing this tank is to take a close range flanking role using your speed to get to a position fast and flank the enemy to hit them in the side or rear in close range, or to take a mid-range spotter role using your speed to get to a key location to spot the enemy advance for your team. You can also hunt air targets with your tank, as the volume of fire is quite good and your rounds travel fast enough to intercept aircraft. The downside of this tank is that the armor is very thin, so any overpressure mechanics will apply. Enemy air and machine gun fire can take you out. Your APFSDS rounds at 500 meters will struggle to penetrate most MBTs in the side, and any heavy tanks or angled shots to the side of the enemy hull will be hard to penetrate even at close range, leaving the primary target to be light tanks, IFVs, and AA tanks. So knowing your target and what you can hunt will be a major factor. That is all for the Rank 5 guide for Japan. As we progress down the line, new features are added to the vehicles, making them more deadly than the last. The next guide will cover tanks in Rank 6 for Japan. If you liked this video or it was helpful to you, please leave a like. And if you liked something in this video and want a more in-depth look at one of these tanks, please leave a comment. And if you would like to see the continuation of these guides, please subscribe. Thank you for watching.